Welcome back to the channel. In today's lesson, we are going behind the scene of Oracle database to look at three very important background processes: log writer, DB writer, and checkpoint. You may have seen these names before, but do you really know what each one does? And more importantly, how do they work together when something goes wrong? These processes play a major role in keeping our data consistent, durable, and recoverable. So today, we are going to break them one by one and bring everything together by looking at database crash recovery. Let's get started. Before we look at each process individually, let's understand why they matter so much. When a transaction is committed, we expect that data to be safe. Even if the database suddenly crashes, Oracle needs to be able to recover and maintain consistency. That's where this background process comes in. Log writer, DB writer, and checkpoint work automatically behind the scene to move and manage information between memory and disks. Their work helps Oracle protect committed data, maintaining consistency and recovery after an unexpected failure. And this is a key part of what makes Oracle reliable as a database system. Let's start with log writer. Its main responsibility is writing redo entries. These entries are held in the redo log buffer in the SGA. Log writer takes that redo information and writes it to the online redo log. And here is the important part. When a transaction commits, Oracle needs that redo information safely written to disk. That's why log writer is important for committed transaction. So if you remember just one thing about log writer, remember this. Log writer writes redo buffer to online redo logs. That is the key job. So what exactly is log writer writing? Almost every change made to the database generates redo. We are talking about DML operations such as insert, update, and delete. But redo isn't limited to DML. It also includes DDL, changes related to undo, rollback information, and commit records. All of this information is placed into the redo buffer. And log writer then writes that information to the online redo logs. Why is this important? Because that redo information is what allows Oracle to reconstruct changes during recovery. So redo is a critical part of Oracle recovery mechanism. Now, here's an important question. When does log writer actually write? One of the most important triggers is a commit. When a transaction commits, log writer writes the necessary redo information to the online redo log. But that's not the only time log writer writes. It also writes approximately every 3 seconds. It can write when the redo buffer becomes 1/3 full. It also writes before DB writer writes and during a log switch. So log writer isn't simply writing at random. Oracle has specific condition that triggers the log writer process. And understanding these triggers helps us understand how Oracle protects our committed transaction. Now let's move to DB writer. And this is where we have a very important distinction. DB writer writes dirty buffers. When data is modified, the corresponding block in the database buffer cache becomes dirty. DB writer eventually writes those modified blocks from the buffer cache to the physical data file. So remember the direction: buffer cache to DB writer, then from DB writer to data files. And here's the key difference between DB writer and log writer. DB writer is not responsible for committing transaction. It also runs independently of commit. So don't confuse the two. Log writer writes the redo, DB writer writes dirty data blocks. So when does DB writer actually write those dirty blocks? There are several situations. One is when Oracle has low free buffer and needs to free space in the buffer cache. DB writer also writes during checkpoints. It can write when an object is dropped or truncated. And it can also write as objects are aged out of memory. The important thing to understand is that DB writer's main goal here is efficient memory management. It's not about committing transaction. That's log writer responsibility. DB writer job is to manage these dirty buffers and eventually get them written to the data files. Now let's talk about checkpoint. Checkpoint has a different role from both log writer and DB writer. Checkpoint does not write the data block itself. Instead, it coordinates checkpoints. It updates the checkpoint NCN and updates checkpoint information in the control file and data file header. It also signals DB writer to write the dirty buffers to disks. So think of checkpoint as a coordinator. It helps Oracle keep track of recovery information and coordinates the writing of dirty buffers. That's what makes checkpoints an important part of the recovery process. Now let's put all these three together. Imagine a user modifies some data. First, the buffer cache is updated. At the same time, redo is generated. That redo goes into the redo buffer. When the transaction commits, log writer writes the redo to the online redo logs. Later, DB writer writes the modified data blocks to the data files. And checkpoint coordinates checkpoints, including signaling DB writer and updating the relevant checkpoint information. So these three processes have different responsibility, but they work together. Log writer handles the redo, DB writer handles the dirty data block, and checkpoint coordinates checkpoints. Together, they provide the foundation of recovery. Now let's imagine something goes wrong. The Oracle instance crashes. What happens next? Oracle begins crash recovery. First, Oracle performs a roll forward. It uses the redo information from the online redo logs to apply the necessary changes. Then Oracle performs a rollback. This removes the effects of transactions that were incomplete when the crash occurred using the undo information. And the checkpoint NCN helps Oracle determine where recovery should begin. Once these recovery steps are completed, the database can be opened. So the overall process is crash database, checkpoint SCN, forward roll, rollback, recovery complete. This is how Oracle gets the database back into a consistent state after an instance failure. Now you might be wondering, why should I as an Oracle DBA care so much about log writer, DB writer, and checkpoint? Because these statements are connected to many areas of Oracle administration. When you're working with performance tuning, understanding this process matters. When you work with RMAN backup, it matters. When you're working with data guard, it matters. When you are performing point-in-time recovery, it matters. And when you are troubleshooting database problem or working with high availability, understanding these processes gives you a much better picture of what is happening inside Oracle. So these aren't just three background processes you need to memorize for an exam. They are fundamentals to understanding how Oracle works. And that's a wrap. Let's quickly bring everything together. Log writer protects committed data by writing redo information to the online redo logs. DB writer writes dirty buffers from the buffer cache to the data files. And checkpoint coordinates checkpoints and helps keep recovery information up to date. Each process has its own responsibility, but together they help Oracle maintain consistency, durability, and recovery. And when an instance failure occurs, this mechanism provides the foundation of crash recovery. If you are serious about becoming an Oracle DBA, understanding log writer, DB writer, and checkpoint is definitely a milestone. Thanks for watching. If you found this lesson useful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And let me know in the comments what Oracle topic you would like me to cover next. I'll see you in the next lesson.